In this video, we'll be talking about muscle and muscle contraction, everything that you need to know for your test. So, your muscle, your body is made up of many muscles, and many people only think of one. You think of your biceps, your triceps, your deltoids, your gluteus maximus, whatever. You think of all these muscles, but this is only one kind of muscle called skeletal or striated muscle. It's called skeletal muscle because it's all the muscles that are attached to your bones, okay? Causing your bones to be able to move so you can do all these movements and pick up weights and run around. So this is only one type of muscle. We also have cardiac and smooth muscle. So cardiac muscle and smooth muscle are different kinds of muscle. So when we look at their cells, it will be different from the skeletal muscle cells. They contract differently, they work completely differently, okay? And basically, skeletal muscle is the only one we can control. We can obviously control our movements, but we cannot control our heartbeat or our digestion. Imagine if we had to control that. It'd be horrible. So we will only care about skeletal or striated muscle for this video. We'll go into detail on how skeletal muscle is contracted, how you move, and all these kinds of things, okay? So let's get into it. So first, I want you to understand the basic concept. If you get this, the rest of the video will make a lot of sense. So in this picture, we have a person that is relaxed. His arms are stretched open, okay? You can see the muscle is quite long. It's relaxed. And when he contracts to lift up this weight, you can see the muscle gets compact, okay? This makes it seem like your muscle is big. So a lot of people think that when they flex, their muscle gets bigger. But actually, all that's happening is your muscle is getting shorter, more compact. So it appears bigger because it all goes into one small area instead of being spread out across your arm. Therefore, when you flex, you think you're bigger. So the concept I want you to understand is that when muscles contract, they shorten. They become more compact, okay? Because when they become more compact, it causes the tendon to pull on the bone so that your arm can move. So when muscles contract, they shorten, and this allows your body to pull on the bones and make movements, okay? So if you understand this concept, that when muscles contract, they shorten, then the rest of the video should make a lot of sense. Because what we'll be doing is we'll be talking about how the muscles contract, how they get shorter. How does that happen? Okay, so here's the basic concept in a bit more detail. So here we have an athlete. He's a biker, okay? And you can see he has humongous thighs. So here we have a bone, a femur. So this is the thigh bone, and it's got some muscle on it. So we're gonna put this here to make it realistic. So you can imagine if you opened up his leg, this is what you would see. You would see a thigh bone and some muscle on it. Okay. But when you look very closely, you'll see that this muscle is made up of, if you look closely there, you can see a bunch of small circles, right? These circles are called muscle bundles, okay? So this here is one muscle bundle. And these muscle bundles, if you look closely, are made up of these things. These things are called muscle cells, okay? Or we can call them muscle fibers. So let me label this. So this is a muscle fiber or a muscle cell. It's a synonym. And you can see it has multiple nuclei. But it doesn't stop there. A muscle cell seems to have something else that it's made of. So what is this? So if we look inside a muscle cell, it is made up of many, let me move this to front. It's made up of many myofibrils, okay? So I'm zooming into a myofibril here. This is one myofibril. So many myofibrils make up a muscle cell. So essentially a myofibril is like organelles of a muscle cell. So now I'm trying to answer to you, how does contraction look like on a very small level? So a myofibril is the thing that contracts. So if all the myofibrils contract, then the muscle cell will contract. Which means if all the muscle cells contract, then the whole muscle will be contracted. So how exactly does this myofibril contract? Let's take a look here. So basically, you can see that this myofibril is made up of repeating units. It's basically like a pattern. You can see this is one. Oh crap! This is one, this is one, this is one. And we'll get into the names of these things later. Right now, I just want you to get the basic concept. So it's made up of these units. So here I'm zooming into one unit. So we're looking at one unit to see how one unit contracts, because all the other units will do the same thing. So right now this unit is relaxed, okay? You can see this, it's relaxed. When it contracts, so when your muscles contract, what happens is the components slide over each other. So look here. You can see this component is sliding, sliding, sliding. Kind of like your fingers. Imagine your two hands and your fingers sliding through each other. It's kind of like the same thing. So if both of the sides slide together through the components, what happened? We can tell the whole unit got smaller. Okay, so the whole myofibril shortened. Okay, so it's contracted now. It got shortened. So if each of these units do the same thing and get shortened, overall the whole muscle cell will get short. And if all the muscle cells in this whole muscle get shorter, the whole muscle will become shorter and contracted. Okay? So this is the basic concept. If this makes sense, then the next parts will basically be going into exactly how this happens. Because this movement can't just happen out of nowhere, right? Something needs to control this movement. It doesn't just happen like magic, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about next. So first off, I didn't mention any names yet. Okay, right here, here's a picture of all the names. So here we have two units. You can see one unit here, one unit here. Okay, so we can see the blue structure here is called the Z line. Okay, from one Z line to the next Z line, this whole thing is called a sarcomere. Basically, when I was saying unit, I meant sarcomere. Okay, sarcomere is a unit. It's from one Z line to the other Z line. We can see there's also this central black line, but you don't need to know the name for this one. All you need to know is that off of this black line, there's a bunch of green thick filaments. Okay? It's thick because compared to the yellow one, it's thicker. Okay? The yellow one is called the thin filament. So the thick filament also has the name of myosin, whereas the thin filament also has the name of actin. I remember this because actin sounds like thin. So the thin filament is actin or actin, whereas the thick one is myosin. Now, basically this unit is exactly the same. So I just put two here for clarity how they're next to each other. There's one more thing you need to know, and that's dark band and light band. So they consider, you need to know that a dark band is the whole area of a myofibril that is occupied by thick filaments. So what would you say in this sarcomere? Is the dark band. So it's this zone. It's the whole section where there's green, where there's thick filaments. So the thin filament is the whole section where there is only thin filaments. Okay? Or just thin filaments, so no thick filaments. So that would be this zone here. This would be the light band, because this is the whole zone where there's only yellow, only the thin filaments. So, and again, if we copy it, this will now also be the thick dark band of the next sarcomere, and so on. You understand the concept. So if you know this is all the names and kind of stuff you need to know. Here, if you try and look at these key points, we're going to look at these key points and see if this makes sense for you. So during contraction, so what I mean by contraction, right, is this movement as this myofibril gets shorter. So during contraction, the filaments, thick and thin, do not change in length. Is this true? Let's look. So when I contract, so when this moves, does the thick and the thin filaments change length? No, right? They don't. They only slide past each other. So make sure you know that. During contraction, the sarcomere gets thinner or shorter. Is this true? Let's look. So right now, we know it's contracted, right? And this whole thing from one Z line to the next Z line is called one sarcomere. Okay, so when it relaxes, what happens? It slides past each other outwards. Okay, it relaxes. Did the sarcomere get bigger now? Yes, it did. Now it's from here to here big instead of from here to here big. It's got bigger. It got longer. So that is true. During contraction, the dark band stays the same. Now let's look. Remember the dark band is wherever there is thick filament. So right now it's relaxed and there's from here to here worth of dark band. Let's contract. How much dark band is there now? Still from here to here. So the dark band area, this does not change during contraction. So my last one is, during contraction, the light band decreases. Is that true? Let's see. So when you're relaxed, let's go to relaxed. How much light band is there? This whole area. This whole area is light band because this is the only area where there's only light or thin filaments. And also this area. Now let's contract. And let's see what happens to the light band. As you contract, the light band gets smaller and smaller and smaller, right? Because now the thin filaments is overlapping with the thick filaments. So there's only a small area now with only thin filaments. So you need to know these 4 things because they always come up on questions. So hopefully this made sense so far though. So now we're finally going to get into the mechanism. How does this happen? Because I told you that this is what happens when you contract. But I said this doesn't happen with magic. So how does it happen? So let's see. Let's go back to our guy here, the biker. Okay, he's got very, very strong legs. And now he really needs to bike really hard. So he's going to send a signal from his brain, because we know our brains control all our movements, our muscle movements. So he's going to send the signal to his leg muscle to make it contract so he can move fast. So this neuron, this muscle cell, sends this signal to the muscle fiber. So this right here, this whole thing, is a muscle fiber. So it's the same thing as this. It's the same thing as this muscle fiber, just I made it bigger so it's clearer to see. So let's label it. So it's a muscle fiber. Only in this image, we can see it's cut open so you can see what's on the inside. Whereas on this image, nothing was cut open. It's just, we can only see the outside. So this is what it looks like on the inside. And right now, it might look really, really confusing, but it will make sense just now. So when the signal comes from the neuron to this muscle fiber, the signal will transfer from the neuron through these little branches onto the muscle fiber wall, which is called the sarcolemma. I tried to color code it, okay? So it's now on the sarcolemma. I'll put it here actually. It's on the membrane. Now, we know that a muscle fiber, inside it, it has many myofibrils, right? All these little circles here. And they are the units that contract. They cause contraction to happen. So when the signal comes on the sarcolemma, it travels along the membrane, the sarcolemma, and then it reaches these little holes, and it goes into them. Once it goes into these holes are, when it goes into these holes are these little pipes, these yellow pipes, as you can see here. It goes into them, now it's in these yellow pipes. These yellow pipes are called T-tubules. Oh yeah, I'm just going to label this. This is a myofibril, along with these other ones. Wait. Okay, here we got a T-tubules. So it's yellow. I tried to color code it. So now the signal is now in the T-tubules. So it could be here, it goes in. Now it travels through the T-tubules, and the signal will now go from the T-tubule to this blue structure. So it's going to transfer to the blue structure. This blue structure is called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay? The sarcoplasmic reticulum stores a lot of this. This is calcium, okay? So it's got a lot of calcium. So once the signal transfers from the T-tubules to the sarcoplasmic reticulum, it will release this calcium. So let me get this. It will release this calcium from this blue structure. And you can see, if this calcium is released from this blue structure, it will go directly towards the myofibrils, okay? It's going to go onto the myofibrils because this blue structure is surrounding the myofibrils. So if this calcium comes out of this blue structure, it will be in contact with the myofibrils. And this is very, very important because calcium is essential to initiate muscle contraction, okay? So basically what we just covered is the first 2 steps in muscle contraction. So 1 and 2. So real quick, we're going to go over the rest because they're quite fast. So now, here we're going to use this image. So this again is a myofibril. I just added a little bit more details to it because in the previous picture that we used, so like here, this one, I didn't have that much detail because I didn't want to confuse you directly. So right now, here we have the same myofibril, so this is one sarcomere, and we're going to look at one section of it to see how the contraction happens, how this unit will slide across this way, how this happens. Okay, so remember, I just said that this man's brain sent a signal to his muscle fiber, and this eventually caused the sarcoplasmic reticulum to release calcium, okay? This calcium came into contact with a myofibril. Now, this calcium let me copy this. So this calcium is now essentially here, okay? And what's going to happen is it has a job, but we're going to get to this one just now. So basically, you can see this actin, the thin filament, isn't alone. Although here I made it appear alone, it is not really alone. It has troponin, which is this structure, and tropomyosin on it. So it's pretty much crowded with stuff. And when it is crowded with all these things, when it's crowded with troponin and tropomyosin, then this, remember this is myosin, and this is called myosin heads, okay? Myosin and myosin heads. When actin is crowded with all these things, the myosin heads can't bind because it's being blocked by all the troponin and tropomyosin. So, what calcium does is it's going to bind to troponin and activate troponin to remove tropomyosin, like this. Do you see? It's going to bind to it. So, let me do this again. So, say it bind to that one as well. So now you can see they're both exposed. They moved. Once the calcium bind to troponin moved the tropomyosin out of the way. So now the myosin head can bind, okay? Now all this time myosin had ATP on it, okay? ATP is energy. So as soon as ATP binds to myosin head, it is broken into two segments, okay? ADP and PI, okay? This is very useful because this is going to cause the movement to happen. So once the myosin head binds now, what's going to happen is the myosin head will rotate like this. So it's basically going to pull on the actin this way. So as it pulls, it's going to cause this to happen. It's going to cause it to pull this way. Okay? And then once it's pulled all the way, what will happen is it will detach. Okay? So what will happen is this will be used up because it just used these two components in order to move this thing. So once it used up these ADP and PI, it will stop. And now in order to detach, ATP will bind again, and now it will detach. So once ATP binds, the myosin head will detach and now find another spot to bind. Okay, and now you can notice, now it will bind to the next spot. And now again, it has ATP. The ATP is converted into the useful form, the ADP plus PI. This is basically, when ATP is converted into these two forms, it can basically cause movement. So now, when these two forms are present, it will pull again, and the thing will move a little bit more. So this happens so fast in your muscles, because all of these steps, they seem so complicated and long, but these steps have to happen so many times. And if they happen fast, then you can make a contraction, right? So you can see the importance of calcium. Calcium makes sure that these myosin heads can bind to actin, okay? And once it binds to this actin, this whole process happens that I just stated. Okay, so here is the clear steps where I use all the right terminology. So we went basically, by the way, so here's a keyword, cross-bridge. So cross-bridge is the name given for when the myosin head binds to actin. That's called a cross-bridge. And the last one would be power stroke. Power stroke is this movement when myosin rotates and pulls the actin and causes this whole segment to move. That is called a power stroke. Okay, so here's all the clear steps. You can read it slowly and use the diagrams that I provided, and I hope this made sense.